going live right now.
Right. So I will begin. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this town hall conversation on mental health alert wristbands and community-oriented policing. To begin, I'd like to introduce our host and Dr. Vanessa Enoch, who is the host of today's town hall meeting and the founder and CEO of Cultural Impact, a business management consulting firm based in Cincinnati. Her main focus is public policy and social change. She is a candidate in the 8th District of Ohio for Congress. So we're very excited to have her with us and to be sponsoring this for us. My name is Elaine Hansen, and I am her political director for the campaign. I am also the president of Hansen Resource Development. We are a company that designs workshops, does coaching, facilitates conversations that are designed to build connections and community. And that's what I'll be doing today. My style of facilitating is grounded in the work of Peter Block, who does something called A Small Group here in Cincinnati. And with that, let me begin to introduce our panelists and our guests for today. I'd like to begin by introducing Officer Andre Ewing. He has been in law enforcement for over 24 years and has created several positions in law enforcement. Among them are the faith-based liaison position and the prison liaison officer. He is also the founder and CEO of Curse Breakers and Death Row Ministries. Next, I'd like to introduce Mayor Omar Neal. Mayor Neal is president and CEO of You Got the Power Enterprises and their radio talk show host. He is the former mayor of I say it wrong every time.
Tuskegee. I got it.
Tuskegee. I always want to start the TUS differently. Tuskegee, Alabama. When you say it, I hear it so plainly. Former Macon County Commissioner, former police officer, and a former juvenile court counselor. He is the founding director of the Youth Aid Division of the Tuskegee Police Department, and he's done many more things. And our guest for today, and I almost forgot, Angela Patterson is part of the panel too. She is a certified peer specialist in mental health. Our guests are Dottie Bailey. Dottie is the CEO and founder of the Mental Health Alert Wristbands Company, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Dottie is a crisis intervention team instructor and a certified peer specialist. She received the Consumer Advocate of the Year Award for the state of Georgia in 2013 and 2020. Next, we have Deborah Cameron. She is a representative of Mental Health Alert Wristbands. She is also a crisis intervention team and an advocate and facilitator for the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. Part of the National Alliance on Mental Illness Training Coordinator and a role player contracted with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Program. And we have Wendy Eugene, who is also a certified peer specialist and active with Mental Health Alert Wristbands. So those are our guests for today. And with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to our host, Dr. Enoch. Oh, you're muted. 1 second.
Okay, there I am. I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And thank you and joining what I believe is a very important conversation. My name is, again, Vanessa Enoch. I am the Democratic nominee for the U.S. House of Representatives in Ohio's 8th Congressional District. When I first set out to run for office, they told me that people had to hear your name at least 3 times to remember it. So let me say for the record that my name again is Dr. Vanessa Enoch. And one more time for the people in the back, I am Vanessa Enoch or Doc Enoch. And now that we have that out of the way, let me tell you why I'm running for office. I'm running because I care about our community and because I believe that the citizens of Ohio's 8th District deserve a representative who will listen to them and who will fight for the things we care about, like ensuring that everyone has health care, a livable wage, and that we don't have to choose between providing for our families and buying life-sustaining medication.
She froze.
Of local community-oriented conversations with people from different perspectives and from both sides of the political spectrum, who will share ideas and come to a consensus about policy initiatives. Let me first of all say that I don't believe that anyone on this panel has all of the answers, but I believe that the best ideas are formulated by bringing people together with different ideas and from different perspectives. That is why today we included a police officer, a previous law enforcement officer who was also a mayor of a city in the US, people from the mental health community, mothers, and community members who are looking for ways to raise awareness about mental health and hopefully save lives. Today's discussion will center on the mental health alert wristband and community-oriented policing. George Floyd at the hands of a police officer has prompted activists across the country to call for divesting funds from police departments and reallocating them to non-policing forms of public safety and community support. Some community advocates believe that cities and states spend far too much money on their police departments without sufficiently funding education, mental health, and other community-based social services. There is also a growing demand for political leaders to defund the police, which usually means reducing funding, not cutting it altogether. I believe that we are better when we listen to each other and develop solutions that benefit everyone. I also believe that transformative change in policing will require input from various perspectives so that the safety of citizens are not at risk. Too many lives have been lost at the hands of a militarized police force engaged in military style tactics. Citizens have been mischaracterized as enemy combatants rather than citizens who are presumed innocent until proven guilty in courts of law. Mentally ill citizens are especially vulnerable. They are often treated like common criminals and in some cases even killed by police officers who are trained as domestic soldiers rather than citizens sent to serve and protect. But I believe that law enforcement officers should not be our enemies. In fact, I invited a police officer who I respect greatly to this conversation and who I consider my friend to be part of this conversation. Since I entered this conversation, my perspective changed after hearing input from people across various perspectives. I would like to personally thank all of our panelists for being part of this important conversation, and I hope that we can have a discussion about mental health and community-oriented policing. So I turn the mic back over to Elaine to get us started today. And thank you so much, Elaine, for being willing to moderate the conversation. And the mic is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, reflecting on what Dr. Enoch has just shared with us, I'd be curious to know why it is important to each of you to be part of today's conversation on the mental health alert wristbands and community-oriented policing. So I invite each of you to reflect on that question and take a moment and respond. Who would like to speak first? I would ask that because we're operating under some time constraints that you limit your response to 2 to 3 minutes. But again, the question I'd like you to respond to is why was it important for you to be part of today's conversation? And who would like to go first?
I'll be happy to start us off.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Dottie Bailey, and I am the founder and CEO of the Mental Health Alert Wristbands. I want to thank you for inviting me today and holding this forum. Community policing is a great concern to people who have mental health diagnosis, as many mentally ill people are afraid of law enforcement due to bad experience or rumors. That's why the CIT, Crisis Intervention Team Program, is so important to us. As CEO of the Mental Health Alert Wristbands, the relationship with law enforcement is very important, as we want them to recognize those who have mental health diagnoses to avoid people from going to jail instead of a hospital, or worse, injured or killed. So for me, coming to this is important because we need to build that bridge. We need to bring about what is going on with law enforcement today and what is going on in our community, especially those who have mental illnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess I can go next. First of all, I'm honored to be here, to be part of such an important conversation. I'm also elated to be here with my dear friend, Dr. Vanessa Enoch, who I hold in very high esteem and appreciative of all of the work that she has done and is doing and will be doing, hopefully, in Congress. Being a former mayor of a city as well as a police officer, I see policing probably from a panoramic view, from a broad view. But let me also say that policing in a democratic society is very unique from policing in other cultures and other societies. We must always, as police officers, respect the constitutional rights of all people to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and all of the things that the Constitution affords them. Now, there is a unique perspective as it relates to people with mental illness. When a police officer encounters a mentally ill or mentally challenged individual, they must take into consideration their diminished ability to process and rationalize. Therefore, patience. When I tell officers all the time, don't rise to the occasion, shrink to your training. Understand that when emotions go up, cognition go down, and that the first person that you should take control over is yourself, and then assist the person who's having mental challenges or an episode, if you will. Help them to get into control of themselves by talking calmly, validating at least their concerns to whatever degree, but treating them like a human being. I think that when we have a warrior mindset, it diminishes the humanity of the person that we see as opposite to us. And so I suggest to police officers that we have a guardian mindset rather than a warrior mindset, that we're going there to serve and to assist in ways that do get best results for all people.
Thank you. Who else would like to respond to the question? Why was it important for you to be here?
Hi, I'm Angela Patterson, and I will respond. I currently work for the Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network, and so this is my daily life, and I'm a person with lived experience, not just with mental health challenges, but also with the judicial system. And I have a family perspective also. Mental health is something that runs in my family. And every year, 1 in 5 Americans will face some form of mental health crisis. And with this year, the COVID being out there, that number we have no number yet as back to know, but it is going to be very high. But what COVID has done for recently is our budget's been cut, our mental health, our state mental health budget. And so I am using every opportunity I can to advocate for mental health funding, for programs. I am the evidence that these things do work, and that the more money that we spend up front, the less we'll have to spend cleaning up a mess, you know. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, wanted to echo the mayor's words of Dr. Ina. Thank you for the invitation and the process of us meeting actually about 5 years ago, and nothing happens from just happenstance. God prepares our journey and puts people in our lives for a reason. The one thing that I'm excited to be here is the mental health is very important, but what happens when it goes both ways? We cannot ignore the mental health that the officers are experiencing as well, and that it cannot just be one-sided just with the community, that the person that is approaching the community, what are their mental health values and issues that they are experiencing in the process. So this is something that I definitely want the panel to address as well, of the police officers that are going under severe stress, not only at home, but maybe in their daily life, and what they're going to experience on a daily activity, and what they will have to share to be able to come and approach somebody in a very respectful, orderly manner.
Mhm.
I would like to,
I'd like to go next.
Who said that?
Wendy,
Wendy.
Screen is kind of
yes,
frozen, but
uh,
Officer Ewing, you're one of the main reasons.
first,
Go ahead, Wendy.
okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
I'd like
Can
to
you hear me
thank Dottie for inviting me into this, and Dr. Enoch as well. I'm here also to learn. I do live with mental illness, and I also am a part of the Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network as well, with working with peers in the mental health community. And part of my involvement with this is basically to learn more about the wristbands, because I do think it is important that individuals with mental illness are equipped, as well as being able to be identified by the law enforcement, so that there is no confusion. And I have to agree with, I'm sorry, the officer, I forget your last name, but that we do need to take into consideration the officer's mental health as well. And through the CIT program, I think, as well as how to take care of their own mental health. And in doing that, they can better understand what is also going on with the patient or with the individual they're coming into contact with. So yes, it is a twofold operation, and I'm just here to learn more about how the two can intercept and become one, and we can get the needs of everyone met. So thank you for including me.
Thank you, Wendy. And Deborah, did you want to join in, or? I think she's frozen.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank the entire panel, including Dr. Enoch, for having me here. It's such a pleasure to meet all you all. And my main purpose for being here, Officer Ewing, I want to focus on you first, because you mentioned that you are a police officer, and I know that you're in plain clothes. And on illnesses, when they see an officer, and I'm even intimidated, full of law enforcement officers in uniform, as opposed to being in plain clothes. That's a different perspective. So
My being here today, I hope to obtain a lot of input that will help me going forward, not only with working with Dottie with the mental health alert wristbands, but for me being a facilitator for the CIT program, and also for me to hear the challenges from you law enforcement officers and the rest of the panel, the challenges that the law enforcement officers go through every day and mental health people with mental health illnesses go through every day. Specifically law enforcement officers, because I attended a NAMI conference last week, and one of the workshops that they focused on was that law enforcement officers have emotions, and we look for them to go out to the community and quote unquote fix things. And like the same thing exists in the mental health world. Keeping that in mind, we have to first fix ourselves, is what the workshop was all about. And they mentioned that emotional intelligence plays a role in our behavior, and realizing that we're not robots, but we're all human. So thank you.
Are you complete, Deborah?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'm just checking because sometimes your sound would drop off, so didn't want to assume you were done. So thank you all for sharing that. One of the things I know was that there were a couple of people, or one person at least, who has a personal story, and I wondered this might be a place for them to share a personal story with the wristbands, or if not, we can move on.
Hi, this is Angela. I have a personal story, as you might can see. I have the wristband on. I've had a wristband on for the past 2 years. I keep it on all the time. I shower it every day. I think this is the second one. I change it every year, but I use them not only to have as an alert, but all the police officers here where I live in Southwest Georgia have been trained in crisis intervention team management. And so for them being able to recognize and try to de-escalate instead of just taking another person to jail who's acting out, and I am a person with lived experience, and what that means for me today is there was a time in my life where I didn't believe that I would ever go back to work or could put a sentence together more than 3 or 4 words at a time. Part of my mental illness came from trauma of domestic violence, and today I am a taxpayer. Today, I do have a job with not just a job, but a purpose in life. I also have addictive substance abuse disorder, and my daughter was out of my life for 8 years, and she now lays on the couch beside me, and we watch a movie or we talk. Today I am present. 152% present in my life today, and that is due to trying to help break the stigma of mental health. It is okay to cry out and ask for help, and then to receive it. And I'm so happy and excited to be part of anything positive in life today, especially revolving around mental health, and being able to share my challenges with others, because recovery is possible. I'm the evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Yes, Dottie.
I am also a person with lived experience. I was diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar 30 years ago. I am a CIT presenter, and I go in and talk to law enforcement about what it's like to live with a mental illness, because unfortunately, law enforcement, when they come upon people who have mental illnesses, they don't get to sit down and hear the whole story. They don't know why we are the way we are. Sometimes people are born with a mental illness, but for example, my case, I was abused from the age of 2 until I left home. And so we have a history, we have a story to tell. The officers in a particular class kept saying, but you don't look like you have a mental illness. And that kind of makes some of us laugh, because what are we supposed to look like? However, my symptoms can mimic an individual who is out of control. So when a law enforcement officer comes upon someone who's having an episode, it can be difficult to determine whether or not we are actually a person with a mental illness, or for better words, a lawbreaker. So when the law enforcement officers kept pushing me, you know, we've got to come up with something. You've got to come up with something so that we can identify you. How can we help you if we don't know who you are? Many times law enforcement officers can't get to a wallet to read the ID. There's not a way for them to confirm the person's episode may be so severe that they can't comprehend what the person is saying. So in coming up with the wristband, it was a way that people can recognize officers or people with mental illnesses on site at a distance. So that cuts off the, you know, it's a game changer. It's just a game changer. And Officer Ewing, I do want to at some point talk with you more about, you know, a police officer's mental health, because we do want to work, you know, with each other. That's the whole point in the wristbands, is uniting law enforcement and those with mental illnesses, and so that we can help each other and break the stigma. And I'll go on to say this: police officers face stigma every day. Every day you put on that uniform, there are going to be people who judge you, people who criticize you. And it's the same day, it's the same thing for people who have mental illnesses. We face judgment and stigma every day. So what better group of people to come together than law enforcement and those with mental illnesses? Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Well, with that, and reflecting on what has been just shared here, I know for me, one of the reasons that this conversation is important is that I think getting all interested parties into this conversation together will expand our perspectives and have a better understanding of what's going on for each other. And that's why I'm so grateful that we have people from the law enforcement as well as from the mental health community sitting here now talking with each other. With that in mind, I'd like to move us into the next conversation. And we all are aware that our country is currently going through historic times with COVID-19, and protest and more are continuing to disrupt what we thought was normal. And to me, all of that is a gift because it's revealing our flaws and dysfunctions in our systems. And I think that in every crisis, there is the opportunity for change and something new to reveal itself, and for us to create something new and better. And I think because of that, it has many people rethinking what we might do now, or what might we do differently with policing, with mental health work, and many other issues in our country. But in particular, we're focusing here on policing, mental health work, and how the mental health alert wristband may assist with that. So I'd like you to reflect on this question. I'm inviting you to reflect on it and respond when you would like. What is the crossroads you face around community-oriented policing and our current approach to the safety and well-being of those with mental health issues? Again, what is the crossroads you face from your perspective around community-oriented policing and our current approach to the safety and well-being of those with mental health issues?
Let me see if I can take a stab at this particular question. And one is, I think that it's important that we contextualize this conversation with the fact that we are in perilous times. We're in different times, and the anxiety associated with COVID-19 has really heightened everyone's emotions as it relates to many things. The systemic inequities that exist within this country and the world. It's been laid bare, and we understand that racism is not new, but it is being revealed in terms of its institutions. It was a person who said that if you don't understand racism, then anything else you think you understand will only serve to confuse you. And so it's important to understand that many of the things that we are experiencing have been inculcated into systems of human activity that we are now seeing the manifestation of together. But let me go back and talk about community policing, which is what I have been advocating for many, many years. See, community policing is not just a person going into, a police officer going into community and having coffee or having a football game with youth in the community. It's more in depth than that. Community policing speaks to the fact that, as Sir Robert Peel, the father of policing, said that the people are the police and the police are the people, that we don't distinguish ourselves as law enforcement from the people. We are a part of the community. The other thing is that community policing is proactive. It is not reactive, which means that it galvanizes all of the protective factors, all of the stakeholders, all of the expertise that we need to deal with the critical issues, to include mental health issues in the community, from the people who are best equipped to deal with that. Now, let me digress just a minute, because I've heard the notion of defunding police. Now, let me say, I think that how that issue has been framed has really scared a lot of people. And there is no way that I believe that we will not have policing in some form. We need policing. We need to be protected and by law enforcement. That is of critical importance. But I think what people are saying in essence is that we need to bring forth our best selves in all of these areas to address the issues that police confront. It has been kind of unfair over the years to have police be the mental health people, the counselors, the doctors, and everything else, that all in one person. And I think what community policing really speaks to is to a way of galvanizing, of collaborating with all of these different entities to work towards solving community issues, whereby law enforcement, as it relates to incarceration and arrest, is minimized. Most things that we do can be resolved without law enforcement intervention on the part of incarceration. And I think that's where we need to be focused, to look at what are the risk factors in the community, what are the protective factors in the community, and how the community police or the police can work in tandem with the community to address those particular issues. One last thing as it relates to what Officer Ewing said. It's of critical importance that we look at the mental health of law enforcement, because law enforcement deal with tragedies all the time. We call it vicarious trauma, where they have internalized the trauma of all what they experienced during the course of the day, and they are human beings just like anyone else. And so many times they need to have some way to process what they are experiencing so that they can go with a level head to deal with community issues. And so I agree that a mental health checkup for police officers should be a regular assessment, kind of a checkup from the neck up, if you will, for police officers on a regular basis. I think it's also important, and I don't want to be too long here, is that we deal with implicit bias and the
Yes.
culture of policing, because that's of critical importance as well. That policing can very well police, or police departments can police differently in different communities, and that's a problem that I would hope that we would have some conversation around.
Thank you. Thank you. So again, the question is, what is the crossroads you face around community policing and our current approach for safety and well-being of those with mental health issues? Does anyone else have a response?
Elaine, I wanted to just mention, I think this is a good and relative point as it relates to a crossroads. I received an email after sending out the information on the conversation that we were having. And this particular person mentioned the fact that, first of all, she is a psychologist, and her concern is the stigma that wearing the bracelet could bring. And she said, my preference is that the police should just start treating everyone humanely. Those who are Black, those who are brown, those with a mental illness, those addicted to opioids, etc. Perhaps better, safer hiring practices of police are needed, also including social service personnel in some 911 calls could be helpful. If a social worker had been part of the team that met with Rayshard Brooks in the Wendy's parking lot, he would most likely still be alive. Including mental health professionals in this capacity could also be helpful. Combining mental health board services with police services makes sense. We have, and then she went on to discuss some other things. I wanted to, because I do see this, I think that the same way that this particular wristband could be very helpful, I wonder if Dottie and her team, if people from the general public are able to wear the wristbands and support, so that it isn't a thing where people who have mental illness would be stigmatized because now they're wearing the bracelet. Or actually, how do you think about that particular issue? And you can also talk about whether or not anybody's ever raised that as an issue. And if not, how would you deal with that kind of a thing?
It has come up several times. And what we look at,
after you, if you don't mind.
What we look at is, if you look at the wristband, it has crisis intervention team on the outside, and the navy blue for law enforcement, the silver for mental illness, and the awareness symbol also has the medical alert. The mental health alert to let officers know is on the inside, so that when I put this on, no one's going to be able to tell that. I chose a silicone wristband because so many people are wearing wristbands now, and it really has not been questioned by a lot of people. As far as you raised another point. I'm sorry, Vanessa.
That's okay.
Go back. Go back.
Her point was that it could be helpful, and at the same time, it could cause a stigma for people in the mental health community. And so I raised the question of if the bracelet is available to, you know, people outside of the mental health community, or is it, you know, a possibility? And have you had that question? And I think you addressed part of it, but go ahead.
Okay, so we do not encourage it as an awareness wristband, because then it can be confusing for law enforcement when there is a episode or situation. They need to be able to identify those people with mental illnesses. If not, then it can be confusing. The only other people that we ask to wear it are CIT trained law enforcement officers. Then that way, a person with a mental illness can see this particular office is trained in mental health. And hey, they get me, they understand, they're a safe person I can go to. So we don't want law enforcement officers who may have anger issues necessarily wearing the wristband. We want someone who is sensitive to those of us who have mental illness. And we have had a very well track record of having only people with mental illnesses wear them, because when the question is asked, we're very clear about who should and should not wear this wristband. And people who don't have a mental illness, when they ask and we explain it to them, then they get it, and they seem to abide by that.
So, Dottie, is there a fear that people who have mental illness could be stigmatized and potentially fall victim? And I see that Debbie's got her hand up, so she may want to address that as well.
I don't necessarily see, like I said, when I pointed out what the wristband looks like, that there's a stigma in it. It's throughout the state of Georgia. It's in over 40 states. And we've not had a problem or a comment in that area thus far. Debbie, what do you want to say?
Well, I think the wristband is a valuable tool. And as you see, I'm wearing one, and that's because I've been diagnosed with dual diagnosis, PTSD, bipolar disorder, OCD, and I work with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center as a role player. And I'm being stigmatized as we speak. I got hired in this position back in December, and everything was going fine. And of course, when you're being interviewed and when you fill out the federal papers, which do a background check going back 7 years, you do have to disclose that you have a mental illness and the details, which I did, but it's supposed to be confidential. Well, one day, and my son passed away about a couple of years ago, which is a whole nother story. But in any event, I was talking with an employee and they mentioned something about my son because they were good friends. And when I told him my son had passed away, he got kind of emotional. We gave each other a hug. Well, the next day I got called into the office and the director sat me down and said, "Debbie, we have a problem." I'm like, "What's wrong?" And she said, "It's been reported that, you know, you might have some issues going on, and we are afraid of not only your safety, but the safety of over 1,200 employees here on the federal ground." And of course, I haven't displayed any type of anything. I don't know who told. I said, "Well, who told?" That was the first thing. And she said, "Well, that's confidential. I cannot say anything about that." She did see me wearing the wristband, however. She said, "So going forward, if you want to keep your job, you'll have to go to your psychiatrist, get a written statement that you are able to perform your job and how many hours you're allowed to work. That's the only way you can come back to work." And I was devastated. This is the first time I've ever been rejected on a job. And I do my job very well. So the next day, I got the statement, I gave it to her. But ever since then, my hours have been cut. And I'm very frustrated about that. And on top of that, when I go on site, I am not allowed to wear the wristband. So far, that's the only negative thing I encountered. And it's very unfortunate. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me add one additional thing, which is something that Dr. Enoch said in her reading of the statement from the person who just delineated a lot of issues. One is that police officers should be trained to identify certain behavior patterns that may be an indication that a person is experiencing a mental health crisis. Because oftentimes, depending on the lighting and other things that may obscure the wristband, the police officer may or may not see it, may or may not recognize what it is, etc. So I think our focus should be, although this may be a tool to enhance the officer in identifying people who may be experiencing mental health crisis, I think the training is so critically important that they began to look at the signs that these people may be altered in terms of their emotional and mental health at that moment. The other thing I think is important is that we treat people with fairness and equity and with dignity and humanity. And I think if we approach law enforcement from the vantage point of treating people with fairness and procedural justice and mercy and all of the things that we should do, then I think that will go a long ways to mitigate the danger that many mental health people and other people may experience when encountering policing or police officer.
May I respond?
Yes.
Sure.
Sir, Mayor Neal, I completely agree with you. It is a tool, and we need our police officers trained so that they can recognize what is going on without having to see the wristband. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. We have not heard of any negative issues regarding the wristbands other than what Deborah has encountered. We're still very unsure how they identified the wristband or why they would take that attitude. But you're absolutely right. It is just one of the tools that we need. All of us need to treat each other and look at each other as someone who may need our help, and especially law enforcement.
Can I just echo in on that?
Sure.
Kind of value, that's one word that as we were speaking on this topic is and Vanessa was speaking on the stigma that may be associated. When we as a country don't value each other on the same level, we will continue to have issues. And so we, with mental health challenges, one of our biggest challenges is to just like with Deborah, unless they saw something happen, they wouldn't have known Deborah has a mental health challenge necessarily. And so this is what the face of addiction looks like today. This is the face of what mental health challenges looks like today. And I bring just as much value to the table as someone who doesn't, or maybe even someone who just can't admit it, who's struggling there. So Thank you. And for me, it is, and for my peers that I work with Dottie and I both work with peers coming through psychiatric hospitals and helping them get established in the communities and through the crisis centers and helping them set goals and help them take steps of making achievable goals and finding value in their own lives. And it is so rewarding. And, you know, and it is, we just need as a community, as a world community, to value individual life.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'd like to pose another question for you to reflect on and consider. As you've heard these different perspectives, I'm curious to know what have you heard today that maybe surprised you or maybe shifted or expanded your thinking, your feelings or thoughts on the topics that we're gathered here to talk about around community oriented policing and the mental health issues, and working together, and listening to Deborah and Dottie and Wendy and Angela talk about the work that they do with equipping and training police and others to be more aware of mental health and how else to approach it. Has anything shifted or surprised you, what you heard from the officers and the mayor?
If I could address that.
Is that you, Wendy?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Your light didn't come on, so I didn't see it.
Sorry. Again, with Officer Ewing, I never thought about it. You get into the habit of advocating so much for individuals with mental health that you forget that there are so many others, not only the individuals with the mental health, but the people who are, such as the officers, such as people even in the community who deal with mental illness, that we also have to consider them as well. That there may be issues in their life, that it may not be quote unquote mental illness, but the other stressors that they have to deal with as well, and that they also need attention. And so hearing his perspective alerted me to that we also need to be cognizant of them. So that was an eye opener for me.
Thank you. Officer Ewing, we haven't heard from you, so please.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I just know I like to be listening ear to before I respond. Well, one thing is very interesting is to communicate and to learn the community, you have to be in the community. When I was able to go into the prison system to learn how did they live, I actually had to go into the prison. I had to actually sit down and talk to the men and women. What are you experiencing on a daily basis? I even had asked wardens at one time, could I stay an evening and go through the entire process to learn what their experience is. And even though that was denied, I always say the example is, unless we come together and learn how to reason and actually get into each other's shoes, we will never really truly experience what someone is thinking. And so when I talk about the mental health as well from officers, you have to understand that suicide now by self-inflicted of police officers is the #1 killer for police. So there's officers that are taking their lives. And I had shared something with Dr. Enoch, and I said, I was able to give a presentation to a men's retreat. And I said, I want you to take a walk with me on a daily basis, what could happen in one day as a police officer. And I walked them through me waking up, kissing my daughter in the morning and sharing her day before she goes to school. And I kiss her goodbye and she says, Daddy, I miss you. I will see you later. And then later on, I'm preparing for work. I get dressed for work. I'm driving to work, and now my mental shifts to where I'm in roll call, going through inspection, and now from roll call I hear the murder that happened last night, the burglary that's there, the stolen autos that just occurred, and that there's been threats on police officers' life. And of course, now in the atmosphere, you hear this every single day that you're less than, and this is, we don't like you, we don't value you either. So now from roll call, I go to a homicide, there's a shooting. You go to that scene, you assess it. And within a couple hours of just taking someone who has lost their life or a violent situation, you will go into the burglary that's just happening. You will shift and go to that scene. And then in that moment, you get a call, hey, there's family trouble. Could you go into this person's home because there's been domestic violence and tell this couple that they should get along for the day. You finish that run and go down to the school because the student is not behaving properly. And then you go to the young little girl who's waving and just wants to be nice to the police. This is a one-day activity, not implying what we've experienced in our own home. And so this is a two-part where let us both come together, because who is the police officer in that day and what is it going? There's no detox for police officers. And this is a 5-day or plus work week. And so for us to work together to get those assessments that need to be consistent, there needs to be facilities for officers to detox through a day like that, which is not considered normal because society now has dehumanized us as well. And that outlook becomes very difficult as we approach it on a daily basis. So I just think this conversation is definitely needed, but we have to come together to sit at the table and actually communicate to make sure all our needs are met, because the last thing I would want is a frustrated, angry, suicidal cop coming to my aid to tell me how to address my needs for the day.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
I can, Officer Ewing, follow up with saying that my nephew, David Lloyd, 23 years ago committed suicide. He was a captain with the fire department and an EMT responder. And he saw quite a few things that were detrimental to his mental health. His coworkers knew that he was dealing with depression. They had taken his handgun away from him, and yet he still found one and he ended his life. And I've had to live with that for 23 years. So I have a clear understanding of what you deal with and what your officers do. I've also met officers, one in particular that left the fire department because of a wreck that he had come upon where children had been killed. And he transferred to the police department because he didn't want to lose his benefits. However, he didn't want anybody on his team or anyone to know that he was seeing a psychiatrist because he was afraid of losing his job. And you see that a lot because they get good benefits. You get, not the good pay that we think you should get, but there is not just a stigma with people in relation to law enforcement. It is law enforcement themselves having to deal with this because they're afraid to get help. And we need to have a lot of people recognize that there is no fear in saying, hey, I'm not okay. And it's okay to not be okay.
Mhm.
So I think that is one thing that definitely needs to be addressed with law enforcement themselves about mental health, is that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to talk about what just happened and what you just went through, and recognize that these are issues that have to be talked about.
Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you. That's very powerful.
You
Was
know,
there a response?
I just want to say, I actually was married to a law enforcement officer for a number of years, and my husband passed away as a result of stress-related conditions as a result of the job that he held for so long. And as someone who was married to an officer of the law, I saw two sides of that story. I saw the impact to the officer in his own home. You know, I saw how we had to have 6 locks on our door, and how he couldn't go shopping with us, grocery shopping with us, without feeling uncomfortable that somebody might be watching him with his family. He had to sit facing the doors, looking at doors and windows in establishments we went into. It isn't even something that I believe that he paid attention to. He always stood in a ready mode, as though everybody was the enemy, could possibly attack at any moment. And I saw those kinds of things, and it used to bother me. And I would ask him, you know, why he would do certain things, and he'd have to stop and think about them, and said, you know, well, I think it's probably just innate. You know, you're always on alert. You're always, you know, having to pay attention, and always having to be in defense mode, and making sure that, you know, you do make it home in the evening. And so I thought it was important to make sure that we had that perspective, that law enforcement perspective, when we had this conversation. I also saw the testosterone rush amongst his friends when they talked about law enforcement work. I saw the solidarity, even when I believe that they were up to wrongdoing as officers. And I would hear stories, I'd hear, you know, as a fraternity, they would cover for one another and protect one another. And so I saw that culture as well. And, you know, I wonder, as we're talking about changing the culture of law enforcement, if people have ideas about how we might be able to do that given the culture, and how we might be able to ensure that we change a culture where, if you have officers who are well-intentioned, that they are able to do something to be productive in their day-to-day work. For example, the law enforcement officers who were present when George Floyd's, he was killed by a police officer with his knee on his neck. I'm just wondering how, as a police officer, maybe Officer Ewing can address, but, you know, how can a police officer who might, you know, be well-intentioned, what could they do in a situation like a George Floyd situation, when they might notice that somebody's dealing with a mental health crisis? Do you have tools at your disposal? Have you been trained in a way that would allow you to feel comfortable doing something to address someone's mental illness? So that's what I'm curious to hear.
You want me to respond to that?
Yes.
Rena?
Yes.
Yeah. What is interesting is, from my experience, we do not have the proper tools in place to be able to assist and identify with those officers. You sometimes have what is set up as you can call someone, you can talk to them, but it's interesting, even when you go to high schools, they have a nurse and they have a guidance counselor on staff ready to talk to the children or individuals that day. And it's amazing for what we experience that we don't have those things in place that day. So if an officer isn't feeling, you know, say very well or stressed, and they want to call in for work, they are being asked a lot of questions by an insensitive supervisor. that's, oh, you want to take off today? What's the reason? We're short today. You can't take off. And I think there should be some structures in place to really evaluate and discuss this with the officer, is what's going on that you need to take off today, and that the information is held in confidentiality. And that's one of the things, officers are very prideful individuals. So to become vulnerable and to say there are some issues, you then appear to be weak. And so you will put on this stigma that you are stronger than what you should be, and you can address it and say, hey, we have peer support. I'm part of the critical incident stress management team that I'm part of, and officers will not utilize that because they don't trust you with that information. And to become vulnerable and give a stranger, per se, information that you're going through something toxic at home, some major bill issues or just issues of life, and to share that, officer is afraid that his or her information will get leaked onto the higher authority superiors of our job, and then you'll be out of a position. And so these are things that need to be in place daily at an officer's disposal before they go into the release that day, and will not be held in a penalty box after that process.
And I believe that that all turns right around back to accepting mental illness, accepting emotional distress, accepting that there are things that affects us, PTSD, for example, that it's not necessarily something that's going to deter us from being able to live a normal life. It's just something that we have to go through and be given the tools to be able to manage. I think that all of us that are here today who have mental illnesses and that are on, the team of the wristbands recognize that. Once we were given the tools, once we were taught what we needed to know to take care of ourselves, we've been able to do it, and we've been able to.
They can,
so
at some
I
point,
if
something to have a positive outcome, that they're going to come up with a plan that's not going to include taking his life because he's mentally ill. Our prisons are filled with people who are mentally ill, with people who have drug addiction. And if we're not
Our signal seems to be dropping. Yeah. She'll be back in just a moment, I think, or maybe cutting her video and coming back.
So Officer Ewing, do you agree with me, or are we on kind of the same path that we need to recognize that it's okay to not be okay and to reach out and get help?
I'll definitely agree with you that we need to have better communication on that. If there's something wrong, who can I speak to in this moment, at this particular time, and that what I tell you will not be abused, and I will not be hurt in any way that it will come back in that position. And that's what we all have faced, that we have this stigma that we are invincible because you're going to save other people's lives, and this is what you do. So to admit that you're not okay is the first rule. However, the person on the receiving end has to be very, very understanding and very respectful, and understand the confidence that you are portraying to them, that it won't be taken upon you, that you will be penalized. And that's what happens is once the information is given, now the officer or individual is penalized, and they'll never reveal anything that they're going through again. And then what do you have after that? You have some major issues that have not been presented. And then you may have an incident with George Floyd where another officer has obviously reached a point of mental illness where he just felt this is the only thing that I can do is take a man's life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Officer,
you.
you are absolutely on point, and I think it's important to note that trust is a calculated risk, and that the police departments must make it clear that it's okay not to be okay, right? It's that we recognize what you experience can have an impact on anybody, and it does not mean that you are weak or that maladjusted or whatever. It means that you are human and that we have moments that we need support. We have moments that we need to call a timeout. The best teams in the world call timeouts when they want to reassess what's going on. That's the same thing that happens with police officers. So I think it's important, and that's why it's so important to have you here on this panel discussion.
Yes.
Is to have the empathy of police officers to understand what police officers go through, and that they are human beings too, trying to respond to very difficult issues that are diverse in the course of a day. I was just good to hear how you could even kind of articulate what a day would look like for a police officer, because many times the community does not have the empathy even for police officers, because they see you merely as an authority and not all the time like a human being with all of the issues that are associated with being human.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm going to move us on a little bit because we're coming to the close here soon. And I just want to say one of the things that I'm hearing here is I'm connecting what Officer Ewing has shared about trust, and it's not a safe place to say, I really need a mental health day kind of thing, or I need some help, support, with what Deborah shared about her experience of her confidential information being disclosed and her being penalized without her having done anything wrong. And so how do we begin to create a world where it is safe to recognize that we all have our needs and traumas that we suffer? And for a police officer, daily you're faced with the potential for some traumatic event, whether it's seeing a child that's been hurt. For any of us to go through that kind of thing, it would be a trauma for us for the day. And it would continue, it would linger if we don't have support to be able to process it and get support that way. I wondered, Vanessa, you had a video that you wanted to show. Do you still think it's appropriate to show it now? And if so, I wanted to give you space to do that. If not,
I think the technology issues that I'm having, the slow internet service may interfere with it. So I don't even want to try it at this point.
Okay.
What I do want, and I think Officer Ewing has driven home the point about the importance of seeing both sides of that perspective. One of the things that when I met Officer Ewing, I met him when he was doing a presentation, and he gave an account of what happens from the police when we see, or when, I'm sorry, not when we see, but when they are called to an incident. He talked about the process of being called and the information that they receive or might receive for such a call, and what they're thinking about on those occasions. And I'm wondering if Officer Ewing might be able to share what's happening or what might a police officer be hearing as we're thinking about an officer being called to a scene and approaching somebody, what kind of information? So Officer Ewing, if you might share that, because I thought it was very important for me to be able to hear that, to better understand the law enforcement officer's perspective. And it might lend way to us being able to create good policy surrounding how law enforcement engages with the community. So if you might share what that looks like from an officer's standpoint.
Yes, ma'am. Because in a lot of cases, here would be a scenario. You would get a call on the street, let's say in the community. There's a subject going around with a gun, and you will get a white T-shirt, black jeans, black shoes. And you would go to this scene, and you're only getting information that the dispatcher tells you on this process. So your mind now, your brain is trying to, number one, I'm going to approach somebody who has a gun, who is in erratic behavior, and I'm being told this information while I'm driving to that scene. And of course, when you approach it and you come out with your gun out and you say, sir, put your hands up, now the individual, not knowing what I heard, says, man, why are you coming at me? Why are you doing this to me? I'm not doing anything. And you say, put your hands, get them out your pocket, and he goes in. What's interesting is those are the moments that are so intense and so fast that you pray they go extremely well. And then after the incident, and say the person does not have a gun, I actually tell them, I want to show you what was on my screen. I want to show you what happened and what was told. And believe it or not, people have been very receptive to say, man, I would have did exactly what you did, because that description is me 100%. And these are the information that we get. And another scenario was a traffic stop that you hear that here's a car that you stop. And when you run this plate, it could come back that the car has a capias or warrant attached to the plate, and you have to use caution approaching it. And so sometimes people immediately will say, what you stopped me for? Why are you doing this? But in the mind of what we just received could be every stop could be your last stop. And so you are using, say, an approach of patience, and there's certain tactics can be used. And that's why when we have seen these officers stay at what I call a state of 100 and are extremely nervous, that's the ones that we have to look at. Why are you feeling as if everyone you stop now that is a fatal approach? What's going on in that officer's mind and life on a daily basis that he feels that way? So it was just about who's next in the process of this mindset that happens on a daily basis.
Let me also say, to kind of echo where Officer Ewing is, but let me say this: when you are a Black male, you experience much of the same thing every day as well, and so it would appear that police officers would have a heightened level of sensitivity and empathy for people of color who feel like they are targets and victims as well. And so a little patience and a little bit more of understanding and appreciation for the fact that they may not always respond the same way you think they ought to respond, particularly when you're yelling out and barking out instructions for people to do things. They can get disoriented and not be as responsive as you think they ought to be. And that may trigger your anxiety to do something to escalate the situation. So I think it's important that when you come to a scene, is that you don't rise to the occasion, you shrink to your training. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we only have a few minutes left. Vanessa, do you want to move to close, or I could ask them the one last question about?
Well, one thing I noticed that there is a hand up of someone who is in the audience, and we had not given any of the audience participants an opportunity to speak. So I do want to allow Katrina, who is one of our guests, to raise her question. Her hand was up. So let me open up the opportunity for Katrina. Katrina, if you can unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Dr. Enoch. I apologize. That was done by accident. But while I'm on, I will just say thank you so much for facilitating this discussion. It has been very enlightening, very helpful. I'm a proponent of community-oriented policing. And so just so that you guys know who I am, I'm Katrina Wilson. I reside in Middletown. I am also working on the campaign of Michelle Novak, who is running for state rep for the 53rd district, and have a long history of working with police in our community. So I am very much in support of community-oriented policing. Thanks again for having this conversation. I think these conversations must be had. We know that there are a lot of incidents around people with mental health issues and their encounters with the police. And so this has been most enlightening. I'm going to encourage all of us to continue to have these conversations. And so just thank you again for inviting me and allowing me to be a part today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those comments. And also thank you for mentioning Michelle Novak, who is a candidate for Ohio State Representative. So if you are in the Middletown area or in which district is that?
It's the 53rd district.
I think you said the 3rd district.
53rd
district, I think it is. Yes. So if for those listening now, or for people who might listen in the future, because this is a recorded conversation, I do want to encourage you to vote for Michelle, as well as myself and Kathy Wynant, who is also running in our district across the 8th district. There are Amy Cox, who is running in the Darke County area, as well as Elaine, can you remind me of any of the candidates you can remember? Any other?
I don't know if it's Kate or Katie Schroeder.
She is, that's Cincinnati. So I was kind of wanting to mention the 8th district, but nonetheless, and I'm
drawing a blank. So
in the 8th congressional district, with me, So, but I do want to remind people to, if you're not already registered to vote, to get out and vote, and to remember, those of us who are running for office, we could use your help, volunteer support, donations, and those kinds of things. And as we're preparing to close out, before I give my final statement, I wanted to, Elaine, find out if any of our panelists have any closing words, and then I can go ahead and give my final statements. And as well, Elaine, if you have any closing words, and then I can give a closing statement.
Well, I'll give the panel and our guest that first, and then I will have a few words. Anyone have any closing remarks about how this experience was for you, or?
Hey,
not all at once. Go ahead, Angela, you can start.
So I was just gonna say thank you, Vanessa and Dottie, for inviting me to come. I enjoy any chance I get to advocate for mental health and for community and connection. And so I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is Wendy. I'd like to thank Vanessa and Dottie and everyone for inviting me. I certainly have enjoyed it, and the perspectives and the information I received. But I also want to let Vanessa know that I have family in Cincinnati. I've already spoken to them about you, and they are supporting you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I want to just say what a pleasure it has been to
can I make a comment?
engage. Is that me? I'm here. Okay.
Go ahead,
To
Mayor Omar, and then Neal, Mayor
Okay.
Neal.
Okay, good. Let me just say it was it was an honor to be a part of this conversation, and we need to continue this conversation. It doesn't need to be one and off. It needs to be a continuation. The other thing is I want to make people know that community policing is not osmosis. It must be orientated, it must be trained, it must be inculcated into the culture of the police departments. And so I'm a community policing trainer, nationally certified in that area. And so we need to have more people who literally train officers and departments in community policing where they understand the gravity of what it is to be a community police.
Thank you. And I thought I heard somebody else's voice, but we're running
Debbie.
short here, so.
I had a
Debbie.
comment to
I
make.
heard Debbie. Yeah, go ahead, Debbie.
Okay, I'm gonna make it quick. First of all, I want to thank all the panelists and Dr. Enoch. And Dr. Enoch, I know you use this foundation. I did some research on Peter Block. I just want to end this with, and Dottie, this refers to you. Peter Block stated, be who you are, not mission. If you're willing to take a chance, the world will support you. And the mental health wristbands are going to go far. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Officer Andre.
Yes, ma'am. Just brief. I want to echo Mayor Neal. The training hours are very important. When I first came on in '96, it was 21 months of training, and a lot of it did not deal with community-oriented policing at all. And then now currently it's 26 months of training. But if you're only trained to learn how to arrest and be aggressive, then how many hours are really training to talk with individuals and talk to people properly, to place in these recruits in environments of their community to where they're going to be working. And that's going to be important to look at the training hours, not just in a classroom, but actually putting the recruits in an atmosphere to understand the community itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to close out and thank you so very much for bringing this to the attention of so many people. I truly appreciate it. And while we are just a organization that is trying to help people who have mental illnesses and connect with people who are law enforcement officers, we are more than that. We have police officers on our board of directors. We work with them on a regular basis. And, you know, our community in large needs to work toward bettering our behavior toward each other and our mental health focus and ideas on that, whether it be for when I served in the military, my son is a federal law enforcement officer, police officers. So many areas in our nation are not focusing on what is truly important, and that is taking care of us so we can take care of others, because we are called to serve, and it's our job to be able to be in the top form to serve other people.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And it was a privilege to be part of this conversation with you and to learn from all of you and expand my own perspectives on mental health and on policing. And so I'm grateful to have been part of this. And Dr. Enoch, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elaine, for being such a wonderful moderator. I want to thank our panelists for today, who all of you in some capacity has and is currently serving our community, whether it be from a law enforcement perspective, the mental health community, as a public servant, I have a great respect for all of the voices on this panel, whether it be even from the perspective of mother. I'm grateful that we could all have this discussion. And I hope that this conversation has brought some of the mental health concerns that I believe are important in protecting and saving lives of citizens in the mental health community. My campaign having over the next several months. And after the citizens of the 8th District elect me to Congress, I plan to have town hall conversations across communities in our district on an ongoing basis. So I want to thank the people who have watched this panel discussion today. We currently have about 264 people watching across various social media. We have people watching on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and all across those various platforms. And so I want to thank you all for tuning in and for watching the presentation. I want to invite people to reach out to our campaign if you have an issue you'd like to discuss in a town hall format. You can reach out directly to Elaine at elaine@enochforcongress.com. And Elaine would be happy to facilitate conversations of various and schedule those conversations. So next Saturday, we'll be having a discussion with the veteran community, veterans. And Dottie, I heard you say that you are a veteran. So thank you so much for your service in that area. We will be having a discussion with the veterans community. And in fact, we'll be talking about the issue of PTSD and traumatic brain injury, on the issue of aid and attendance for veterans and the importance of veterans being able to get the help and the care that they need after they sustain a traumatic brain injury, which is another area of mental health which has been ignored. So you can check out our events calendar or volunteer, get yard signs. We've got yard signs coming in. Next week, you can get bumper stickers, Enoch for Congress coffee mugs and t-shirts and all of those wonderful things.
Yes,
all of that. Donate to my campaign at enochforcongress.com. So we'd love for you to visit enochforcongress.com and get your coffee mug. My name again, for those of you who might be in the back of the room and can't hear, my name again is Vanessa Enoch. And again, they told me to repeat that at least 3 times. So Vanessa Enoch, Vanessa Enoch, Vanessa Enoch. And I hope that I will have your vote on November 3rd of this year. And again, thank you so much for the guests, for the panelists, and for everybody involved in today's presentation. And I want you guys to all have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. And we'll see you all next week as viewers of the next presentation if you're not part of this discussion. So thanks again, and have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And let me leave. Here we go.
Yeah, hold on a second. I've got to close out our social media and end the conversation.